Hello, my name is Barry Hill, and today I'm going to be presenting a lecture on epidemiology with a special emphasis on the topic of fomites. So, just kind of give a brief outline here. We're going over what is a fomite. We'll go ahead and define it for you. Then we'll go over some fomite characteristics, things that are pertinent and would be important for you to know as you go about your daily lives and you should think about the surroundings around you and what might potentially be on them. We talk about fomite inhabitants or germs, what could be living on these objects. I'll cover two important categories, bacteria, and then we'll cover viruses and their significance and relevance for the day and age we live in, and how long they survive on these fomites, and other topics surrounding those issues. Next, we'll cover significant fomite pathogens, and then fomites, and then transmissibility of those fomites, and then we'll have a brief review as well. So to define a fomite, we use a dictionary of epidemiology by Porta, the 5th edition. A fomite is an article that conveys infection to others because they have been contaminated by pathogenic organisms. Some examples may include a handkerchief, a drinking glass, door handle, clothing, toys, keyboards, etc. Or as I've depicted down here, we have an iPhone, we have some plastic toys, things that we use very commonplace. We hold a phone up to our face. It has germs on it. The germs could get on our face. We have toddler toys, infants in daycare centers. They put these in their mouths. And they play with them constantly, and they share them. And we have door handles. Everybody touches them. If somebody coughs on their hand, sneezes on their hand, touches a door handle, that door handle could then pass it on to somebody else. So let's go over some various characteristics of fomites, kind of give an introduction here, and then I will reinforce them later on. Seasonal changes can increase the contamination of fomites. We'll see a study that saw different variations in the amount of fomite contamination, and what items were the most dirty in several places around the U.S. Different fomites will have more contamination than others, and it's based on several different factors, depending on how often it's used. If there's a lot of people using the same object, and say 2 or 3 of them are sick, it's more probable that the object or the surface is going to be dirty. Surface type. We've classified it into 2 major types of categories based off of literature. We have non-porous surfaces, things like stainless steel and plastic. They have increased persistence and transfer of bacteria. So not only do bacteria and viruses live longer on non-porous surfaces, but they transfer easily to your hands and to other objects as well. Then we have another surface type which is porous. It'd be something like a cloth or a dish towel, or something like that, like clothing, articles of clothing. And you see with these objects is that you have decreased persistence. They don't live quite as long, although there's some exceptions, and they don't transfer to your hands when you touch them. They don't transfer nearly as readily. And then we have the purpose or location of surface. What is the surface used for? Is it a diaper changing station? Is it a faucet handle in a bathroom sink? What are these surfaces? What are the purposes? What are the locations? Because these issues make them important for fomites as well. And then lastly, certain types of pathogens live on fomites longer than others. So you may see this one virus may live for a couple hours, whereas this one may live for a couple days, or a bacteria might even live for several months on a surface. And so we'll cover those topics as well. So here we see a study that sampled various items from a number of daycare centers, and what it found is that many surfaces were contaminated with influenza A virus. As you see from the graph here, we can see that approximately 80% of phone receivers were contaminated, 60% of refrigerators and doorknobs, microwaves. As you can see down here from this graphic, the relative percentage of positive surfaces. We see the TV remote, the microwave. These surfaces are contaminated more than half of the time. Remember that fomite contamination can vary depending on numerous factors, including the purpose of usage, such as like the toilet handle or the doorknob, And you would suspect that with influenza A, you would see maybe more of these items contaminated with influenza. But if you're looking at maybe bacteria of fecal origin from stool, you would suspect that the bath faucet and the toilet handle would be more contaminated with that. Okay, so not only does it differ by type or purpose of the object, but also what type of pathogen you're looking at, whether or not it's bacteria or a virus, and specific types of each. So remember, it's also frequency of uses and service material as well. So here we can look at this graph depicts the number of people that get sick with flu in the year 2012 to 2013. So as we can see here, the red color depicts a strain of the flu, AH3, and yellow is strain of flu influenza A, and the B is influenza B. And what we can see here is that during this period of the year, it has a number of the weeks of the year, and what happens is you see an increasing number of the people who are sick with the flu. Okay, and so we can see seasonal variations with fomite contamination based on different times of the year. So if you would think about more people are becoming sick with the flu, you would be highly suspicious that more items around you are contaminated with influenza or many other types of bacteria or many other types of viruses. So during these periods of time, it's crucially important to be aware that these objects around you could potentially be contaminated. And we see that here. We see that in daycare centers, we look at influenza A. We see here that we have the white represents the spring, and then the spotted here, or the striped here, represents the fall. We see here that in the spring we have a much higher percentage of positive surfaces for influenza A. We see the diaper area is up to 70%, whereas in the fall it's only around 20%. And we see that consistently throughout, with one exception being the infant toy. This is extremely important with the emergence of the H1N1 flu virus and the avian influenza virus strain H7N9 that has now been observed to infect humans. It's of paramount importance to maintain a clean sanitary environment, and it's also helpful to know maybe what periods of the year are important to be especially concerned about, such as the flu season. And you can kind of get an idea of the flu season progress through resources made available by the CDC. So we can see here that as opposed to the previous slide, we see that it was within a single range of weeks within the year. But we can see here that it varies greatly from year to year. Seasonal patterns are not always predictable and cover a wide range of months. You can see from this graph, the flu season exceeded the national baseline, or the endemic state, right here between September and March, from the time period of 2002 to 2013. However, the flu season can begin as early as October and end as late as May, but it usually peaks in January, February, or later on. So when you think about the key months to really be thinking about the flu, about fomite contamination, is in January, February. Those would be the key months. However, we do see a great deal of variation with the flu, and I would suspect that it would be the same with many other diseases as well, as you see increasing amounts of prevalence or incidence in other diseases as well. And I use these words prevalence and incidence. You can find them in your textbook, as they refer to the prevalence is the number of percent of viruses at any one given point in time, so you go straight up, and incidence as the rate at which they're increasing is kind of a general definition, but please refer to your manual in referencing those. Here we look at the geographical variations in parainfluenza virus, number 1, HPIV1. And I mentioned this before to reference that there are many different variations that occur with fomites. These geographical outbreaks might be explained by factors such as weather, humidity, and temperature. Another explanation may be the type of business or company that these samples were taken in. These samples were taken in different buildings, company buildings in various cities throughout the U.S., such as Tucson, Chicago, San Francisco, and they were categorized by a type of object they were: doorknob, light switch, table, chair arm, etc. And so you would think that maybe a telemarketer company that shares desks between employees may have a higher contamination of cellular devices. So down here we see phone, maybe in Atlanta, maybe that was a telemarketing company. However, businesses that encourage frequent use of common items such as a photocopier, fridge, or a microwave handle for storing and preparing food may have more contamination of those items. And also other factors that may consider are age and gender of the employees may also play an important role, as some may be caring for children, which are really susceptible to many different types of illnesses, or they may be elderly and be more susceptible to themselves. However, when we look at the big picture overall, we see a great deal of variation in the number and type of objects that are contaminated in these areas. But there are some overarching factors that we can look at that kind of apply across the board. Of course, there are many different types of exceptions. There are some exceptions to the rule, but in general, most bacteria, fungi, and viruses have increased persistence on fomites with lower temperatures, around 4 degrees Celsius to 6 degrees Celsius, with higher humidity, around 70%, and then higher pathogen density. And what this means is that if you have a lot of bacteria, a lot of viruses clumped together in a small space, what they do is they kind of provide moisture to each other to try and keep and retain moisture, and helps prevent them drying out and dying. Okay, so you would suspect in these areas with lower temperature, higher humidity, higher pathogen density, places that are really dirty, they're going to survive for a longer period of time. Although there are exceptions for many different pathogens to these rules, this is kind of an overall generalization. And then different environments may lead to increased fomite contamination. We look at daycare centers, as we've seen in previous slides, they're contaminated with influenza A virus. They're also contaminated with fecal bacteria from daycare workers working with diaper changing stations and areas like that. They easily become contaminated and then spread via the hands or other surfaces. Children playing with toys, sticking them in their mouths, and children, although they're cute and adorable and they're precious, they do not always have very good hygiene practices. So another area is any congested indoor environment. If there's a busy workplace, people are using the microwave, people are using the photocopier, they're touching the same objects repeatedly. If there's a couple sick people in there, it's very probable that someone's going to touch the same surface. Someone just sneezed their hand, touched the door handle, somebody else goes through the door, touches the door handle, and then they now have those germs on their hands. Another one is really a major site of great importance is hospitals. This is where patients can serve as a reservoir or as a kind of a storage place or a source of bacteria and viruses. And this is particularly important because you want to make sure not only to protect yourself from getting sick, but you want to protect the patient as well, because people who are sick have a decreased ability to fight off further infection. So you don't want to make sure, you would want to make sure that you don't infect the patient with whatever you're carrying on your hands, as they may be more susceptible to that. And then schools and academic settings, you have a student sitting in a chair, maybe where you're at right now, and the next hour somebody else will be sitting in the same chair, and vice versa every other hour. So these areas are of significant importance to fomites and for infection control. We do see some individual factors as well. When we look at a disease like pneumonia, one factor that is taken consideration is the age of the individual. Particularly with pneumonia, we look at adults 65 years of age and older, and children younger than 5 years of age. Particularly because we have infants and children that crawl on the floor, put their hands and toys in their mouths. Besides pneumonia, we see that infant nurseries have been the site of transmission of several transmissible diseases, including giardiasis, shigellosis, campylobacteriosis, rotavirus, and hepatitis, much of which cause diarrhea, stomach cramps, and fever. However, older adults, as the category is 65 years and older, are also more susceptible as they have a decreased ability to fight infection. This is because as we age, the human immune system becomes less effective over time, and so they have a decreased ability to fight infection and to stay healthy. Certain medical conditions as well might help somebody to get sick as well from fomites, something such as smoking or asthma or diabetes. Interesting fact about smoking is that the nicotine in cigarettes will paralyze the cilia in the respiratory system. And the cilia in the respiratory system, they're little projections, little finger-like projections that beat upwards and bring up like dirt and particles that would get trapped in your airways. They'll bring it up and would be excreted with mucus. So it kind of brings up all that junk that gets trapped in your airways. However, the nicotine in cigarettes will paralyze these cilia that would normally function to excrete these foreign particles trapped in mucus. And this is where we get the term smoker's cough, because they must cough to expel these foreign particles, and it makes it more difficult to try and cough and bring up mucus if you're sick, and try to expel foreign particles that might make you sick. And asthma and diabetes are other medical conditions that might make it worse, or might make you more susceptible to getting pneumonia. Medical care as well. If we look at C. difficile as a bacteria that can cause severe diarrhea, and it causes about 14,000 deaths a year. Those that are taking antibiotics are increased susceptibility to C. difficile. And when people do not wash their hands, people do not wash the surfaces around them, there's increased chance that those bacteria will get into the mouths or the eyes of the patients and cause them to become sick. And then those who have received your medical care, because if you're like I said before, if you're sick with one thing, you have a decreased ability to fight off further infection. And then another bacteria called MRSA, I'll define that, kind of go over that here momentarily throughout the lecture. Is a bacteria that usually infects the skin, but then when you have an open cut or wound, say from an injury or a surgical procedure, the bacteria can get in these cuts and cause major problems for these people. So let's cover one of the different residents of fomites that like to contaminate fomites, bacteria. We see bacteria transfer onto skin much better from non-porous fomites such as vinyl, Legos, or ceramics than from porous fomites such as cloth or tissue. However, damp, porous items serve as excellent bacteria reservoirs and may transfer many bacteria onto hands if wrung out or squeezed. So like a sponge. A sponge may not make your hands very dirty if you just touch it, but if you were to squeeze it and wring it out, it could expel many bacteria and can make your hands very dirty. But we see here that 62% of bacteria will transfer to your hand from a non-porous fomite, such as like a smooth countertop or a stainless steel faucet handle, whereas opposed to a porous fomite such as like a dishcloth or something like that, only about 2% of bacteria will transfer to your hand. So that's an important thing to note. Bacteria also can survive on surfaces for an extended period of time. For instance, C. difficile spores are very resilient and can live up to 5 months on surfaces. But we can see anywhere from days to weeks, for even months, for bacteria to live on these surfaces. Another study shows that around 40% of bacteria on a fomite can be transferred to a hand, and that around 41% of bacteria on a hand can be transferred to a lip. Given that a large number of bacteria can be expelled from stool or fecal matter, and that this matter can get on our hands, significant numbers of bacteria can be transferred to the mucosal surfaces of the nose, the mouth, and the eyes, portals into the body, and they can cause infection. Okay, so we see here with this bacteria M. luteus, we see that 40.03% of this bacteria transferred from the faucet in a bathroom to a hand, and that just under 42% transferred from a phone receiver to a hand. Then they looked at how well luteus would transfer from a hand to a lip as we touch our face. They found that 41% of the bacteria on our hand actually made it to our lip and took up residence there. So this is of extreme importance as we think about touching our face and touching dirty objects. Here we can see that not only do we have with non-porous and porous surfaces that we see a difference in how easily something can transfer to hands or to the surface of the lip, we also see that these bacteria can survive for an extended period of time on surfaces. So we look at Clostridium difficile, I mentioned that, 5 months. We have Chlamydia pneumoniae or C. trachomatis. We have less than 30 hours. We see Shigella 2 days to 5 months. Streptococcus pneumoniae 1 to 20 days. Okay, so you can see here that bacteria can live for an extremely long period of time on these surfaces. As we cover a few of the more important ones here, we'll cover Streptococcus pneumoniae. Down here is actually the most common cause of bacterial pneumonia in the United States. Another cause is Staphylococcus aureus. And pneumonia is of a paramount importance as the CDC reports that globally pneumonia causes more deaths than any other infectious disease. And in 2009, 1.1 million people 1.1 million people in the United States alone were hospitalized with pneumonia, and more than 50,000 died. So think about all the people who are sick and not even hospitalized. So pneumonia has significant implications as far as infection control. And you can see it here that the two major suspects for pneumonia, Streptococcus pneumoniae and Staph A, live from 1 to 20 days, or in the Staph A's case, 7 days to 7 months, can just be sitting around on objects waiting to be picked up. So we see that this is of a paramount importance. Another one is Clostridium difficile, and these can form spores that are very resistant and can survive on objects for a long period of time. So Clostridium difficile is often referred to as C. diff and is an important healthcare associated infection, or HAI as is often referred to as. The people that are at the highest risk for this disease are older adults who take antibiotics and also receive medical care. C. difficile causes diarrhea that is linked to approximately 14,000 deaths per year in the United States, and it's very common to see that in a healthcare setting. Then we touch on, we know we touched on Staph A as a cause of pneumonia, but we want to focus on particularly on MRSA. And MRSA stands for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. And what it is an antibiotic-resistant bacteria that primarily infects the skin normally. It is actually the leading cause of skin and soft tissue infection in the community, and the community is a term used to refer to any place outside of a hospital, like in a home or in a trailer park or in a housing community. A major risk factor that has been identified for MRSA infections is the sharing of personal items, or as we now know, we'd call them contaminated fomites. MRSA and Staph aureus can have serious complications and may even require hospitalization. In fact, there were approximately just under 500,000, actually around 468,000 hospitalizations in 2005 with a diagnosis of S. aureus infection, and 278,000 of these were related to MRSA. Many of the cases of MRSA in the healthcare setting are even more severe and even fatal, as the bacteria may infect the bloodstream if it gets through something like a blood draw, if it gets into the interior of the skin through a surgical site during a dressing change, or it can even cause pneumonia if it enters the respiratory tract. So this next slide shows a picture of a skin infection of MRSA, just to kind of give you a heads up here. We can see that a skin infection can still have major complications and can cause major sore, and it's not something to be taken lightly, as these things are, MRSA is very difficult to treat because it's resistant to many different types of antibiotics, and so makes it particularly concerning, as many people do come down with this, and it can even invade through a cut or sore and make matters even worse. Here we see a graph of MRSA and its relative survival rate on different types of surfaces. So if you can see over here, it says CFU recovered. The CFU stands for colony forming units, and essentially what it is just a unit used to measure the number of bacteria. So just think of the number of bacteria. We have increasing number of bacteria, and then here we have number of days after we've infected a towel or bed sheet or ceramic with these bacteria. And we can look at how long they survive. You see here that the ceramic is depicted as being red, survives around 28 days. On wood, we have about a little over a week, it looks like. But these are more porous type of surfaces, a towel or wood. They're not necessarily smooth, they're not polished, they have crevices. We look at something like plastic building blocks, or we look at vinyl, and we see that the MRSA survives for a much longer period of time, reaching up to 63 to 70 days, as opposed to some of these other objects where it's around a week or a little bit more than a week. So we see that with porous objects, we see a great amount of variation from porous objects as opposed to non-porous objects. But even further than that, we see variation by specific strain. So we can see over here on the right-hand side, we have strain 219 of MRSA, we see strain 247, and we see strain 250. And we still see a great deal of variation in how long that these survive on surfaces, either by the strain or by the type of surface that they're on. And I just show this graph to show you that there's a great deal of variation in all these bacteria, the strains, and how long they survive on surfaces. The second type of pathogen I want to talk to you about, the major category of pathogen I want to talk to you about as contaminating fomites are viruses. So we have influenza A and B viruses can survive on fomites for 24 to 48 hours on stainless steel and plastic, and they survive less than 8 to 12 hours on surfaces such as like cloth or paper or tissues. And this is similar to bacteria. We looked at bacteria and we found that bacteria survived much longer on what type of surfaces. They were the non-porous surfaces, correct? The surfaces such as stainless steel and plastic. So we see a similarity here. See, both viruses and bacteria survive much longer on stainless steel, plastics, and these non-porous surfaces, and then bacteria and viruses do not survive nearly as long on porous surfaces such as cloth, paper, and tissues. We see here that viruses were transferred from stainless steel to hands for up to 24 hours. And a cloth was only had a window of 15 minutes where you could touch something that was cloth, and that would transfer to your hands. And that once the virus got on your hands, it would survive up to 5 minutes after transfer. Okay, so remember that 5 minutes. A virus is on your hand for 5 minutes. Okay, remember that. Okay, we look at next point. We look at sick individuals could transmit infection via stainless steel surface for 2 to 8 hours. So what this means is that somebody who is sick will expel, will cough, they'll sneeze onto a stainless steel surface, and that for 2 to 8 hours that stainless steel surface could transmit infection, not just bacteria, not just viruses, but contract, or I guess it would be specifically for viruses, could transmit infection from these surfaces just through coughing, sneezing, or nasal secretions onto stainless steel. And then we see it's only a few minutes with paper tissues. Okay, so this is very important for infection control, because people could get sick from this. We're not looking just at bacteria or virus transfer, we're looking at infection. So we look at viruses and the relative importance. Respiratory infections cause sneezing and coughing, which can expel 10 to the 7th or 10 million virons per milliliter of nasal fluid. Okay, so in 1 milliliter of nasal fluid, you have around 10 million virons. So you have nasal secretions that can travel at a speed of up to 20 meters per second at a distance of greater than 3 meters when you cough or sneeze. And they spread all the way around the room, contaminating hands and surrounding fomites. And so these can be picked up as people touch these objects. We look at donor to recipient transmission via a fomite, and I'll kind of go through a study that was done on that. What was done is that they had one person had his hand infected with rhinovirus, which actually accounts for 30 to 50% of all colds. Was infected on was placed on his hand, contaminated his hand, and he touched the doorknob to open it. Then when they had a second person come by and touch the same doorknob, what happened is when they sampled his hand after he touched the doorknob, 22% of the bacteria on the first person's hand ended up on the hand of the second person. So think about how many bacteria, or how many viruses rather, you're picking up just by touching objects as you go around your daily routine. We look here at viruses. Just like bacteria, we see that they last or survive much longer on plastic and stainless steel or non-porous fomites. We look at influenza A specifically. We can see that we see a downward trend here, but it's much less pronounced than these objects over here, that pajamas, tissue, magazine, handkerchief, that are much more porous. So the survival is not nearly as good. Keep in mind that this y-axis is in logarithmic scale, so you think of going from 1,000 to 100, 100 to 10. So you think of this downward trend here is that it deteriorates very quickly, whereas influenza A virus, it comes down much more gradually, although it is significant. Influenza B virus, when we look at this, we see a very similar pattern. When we look at stainless steel and plastic, we still see the same type of trend, and this is fairly common throughout the viruses as a whole. We see viruses surviving much longer on stainless steel and plastic than these other more porous type of surfaces. So when we look at this table, what we can see here is that this diagram shows how many viable influenza viruses, these number of viruses that can cause infection, in TCID. Okay, as you can see down here, expressed in TCID 50. And what this is basically it's a unit of measurement to kind of give you an idea of how many viruses are there. So let's say for instance a TCID is usually in a concentration of like maybe 50 viruses, or how many viruses it is. It's a standardized experimental measurement of how many viruses are in a sample. Okay, so we'll just think of TCID as a measurement of how many viruses there are. Okay, so what they did here is they showed how many infectable or viable influenza A viruses could be transferred to hands after 5 different time periods, after 0 minutes, 15 minutes, 2 hours, 8 hours, and 24 hours. As can be seen, after 24 hours, there are still around 50 or 10 to the 1.7 TCID 50 of influenza A out of initial 10 to the 4.5, which comes out to around 31,000. Doesn't seem like much, does it? But remember that these are in concentration units of just 0.1 milliliter. Okay, so even after 24 hours, if we have only 50 or 10 to the 1.7, that's 50 viable viruses in 0.1 milliliter. But you think if you just have 1 milliliter, okay, after 24 hours of sitting on something like a phone, there are approximately 500 TCID on your hand. Studies have shown that if just 100 people have 127 to 320 TCID placed in their nose, that half of them will get sick. Okay, so there are a lot of viruses there that can make people get sick, even though it's been sitting out for 24 hours. And although there's only 500 TCID in 1 milliliter, it's still very potent and can make many people sick from it. So here we see that there is a great deal of persistence of viruses as well on dry surfaces. We look at coronavirus, 3 hours, SARS associated virus, 72 to 96 hours. We look at the polio virus, type 1 and type 2, 4 hours to 8 days, 1 day to 8 weeks. And we see that In general, the viruses do not live quite as long as bacteria, but they still do survive for a significant period of time. What particularly makes viruses important is that they are deposited in large quantities via coughing, sneezing, nasal secretions, and makes them especially concerning because there's so many of them, they're so concentrated. Let's look at a few important ones. We've seen, as I mentioned before, rhinovirus is estimated to cause 30 to 50% of all colds, and coincidentally, they grow best at a temperature of around 91 degrees Fahrenheit, which coincidentally is a temperature inside the human nose. So the bacteria will, or the virus rather, I'm sorry, will grow inside the nose and it will infect people. People will sneeze and then spread it onto other people. We see up here coronaviruses last for approximately 3 hours, and they cause 10 to 15% of all adult colds. And this is particularly important not just for getting sick, but as in terms of productivity as well. I mean, one study indicated that the average reduction in ability to perform work with a cold was about 21.2% compared to people's productivity while they're healthy. So if you think, if you're a student, if you're an athlete, if you're trying to work to that next job promotion, and you're only working, and your ability to work is decreased by 21.2%, that's significant. Colds can last for up to a week, and even past beyond that. So you think about all the time that you're missing out and not being able to enjoy or to work hard and to do all these other things that would advance yourself, or even to enjoy a nice day out at the lake. I mean, this is of paramount importance for just performing work and doing other activities as well. We look at another one, respiratory syncytial virus, is actually a major cause of respiratory illness in young children, affecting approximately 90% of them by the age of 2. This illness tends to spread to about 40% of the child's family members and causes the elderly to have a higher rate of pneumonia and death. And in fact, England and Wales estimates that RSV, or respiratory syncytial virus, causes approximately 60-80% more deaths than influenza, and it comes out to about 23,000 deaths each winter in England and Wales. So respiratory syncytial virus is extremely important as well, as we can see here, lasts up to 6 hours. And so we want to pay special attention to that one as well. Here we see the influenza virus lasts up to 1 to 2 days on various surfaces, and we'll cover that more in detail here on this next slide. And we can see that in the United States, on average, 5 to 20% of the population gets the flu, and then more than 200,000 people are hospitalized from seasonal flu-related complications every year. Okay, to kind of put this into perspective, 5 to 20% of the entire population of the United States comes out to about 16 to 65 million people every year. Okay, and that more than 200,000 people are hospitalized from seasonal flu every year. And we can see that not only are people sick and we have a morbidity rate from influenza, but we have a mortality rate as well. People actually die from the flu. We can see from 1876 to 2006, the flu has killed between 3,000 to just under 50,000 people in the U.S. every year. And especially important times or pandemic times when it's really prevalent, you see up to 50,000 people die in the U.S. Important thing about flu is that a person may infect others one day before their symptoms even develop, before they even know that they're sick, and up to 5 to 7 days after becoming sick. So it's very important to be aware of maybe who is sick and how to avoid contaminating other people, and making sure that you clean surfaces as well. The problem is that we touch contaminated fomites, and then sometimes without even really realizing it, we touch our face. And studies show that hands touch the face approximately 15.7 times an hour, or more than every 4 minutes. So if you think about everything you've touched, the door handle you touch, your cell phone, things that could potentially have bacteria and viruses on them, and then you touch your face about every 4 minutes. chances are you're probably touching your face right now as you're listening to this lecture. And then what's important is that when contaminated hands come into contact with the mucosal surfaces of the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, illness can occur, as these are, again, portals of entry into the body that can cause infection. So as a review, germs can survive on fomites for quite some time. Germs can be transferred to a hand by touching a fomite and vice versa from hand to mouth. Many potentially dangerous pathogens have been observed living on fomites. So if you think about influenza, respiratory syncytial virus, MRSA, all these different bacteria and viruses have been observed to live on fomites. Certain factors can make an individual more susceptible to infections, such as age, or whether or not you're taking antibiotics, or whether or not you have a medical condition. And it is very impossible to become ill and even die by touching a contaminated fomite. These are a list of sources that I used in making this lecture. Thank you for your time, and have a good evening. Hello, my name is Barry Hill, and I'll be presenting a lecture today on the topic of hand hygiene, specific focus with epidemiology within hand hygiene, and we'll be going over just a brief introduction here. Begin off this lecture with a brief video clip from the CDC entitled "Put Your Hands Together," to kind of give you an introduction to the importance of and relevance of hand washing and hand hygiene. We will then cover the significance or relevance of hand washing in today's day and age, look at the importance of hand washing in the bathroom and our current bathroom behaviors as far as hand washing. We'll look at the proper technique of what's the best, most effective method to wash your hands. We'll also look at a brief hand washing history. We'll look at hand sanitizer and how effective it is at killing bacteria and viruses on hands, and then how effective it is at reducing illness when used in an academic setting. Also look at a comparison of hand sanitizer and hand washing and see how effective they are in killing germs. And then cover some specific critical times of when it is appropriate, when is it best to wash hands, and then we will go over a few preventable diseases that could be prevented with simply washing your hands or using a hand sanitizer, and then we will review, have a brief review of some of the things that we have covered.
CDC TV presents Health Matters.
At the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, we are very interested in preventing transmission of disease in our community.
People aren't washing their hands as often as they say they are or as often as they should.
Researchers in London estimate that if everyone routinely washed their hands, 1 million deaths a year could be prevented.
And the germs can live on our hands for quite some time unless we clean them. If we don't clean them and we go and touch something in the meantime, we can spread those germs to other places or other people, and disease can be spread this way.
Animals can carry germs that can make people sick, and these germs can be not only on the animal, but can be in areas where the animals live as well.
When people do regular hand washing, especially with children, that you supervise that hand washing, so you make sure the children are doing it properly and for the length of time that's necessary.
They're coughing and sneezing onto their hands and touching doorknobs. They're using shared objects like pencils or toys. And disease is passed easily from one child to the next.
Try and avoid sneezing into your hand because you just contaminate them and then spread those germs everywhere. Focus on sneezing into your elbow, like this, and then you don't contaminate your hands. Turn on the water, wet your hands, apply a good amount of soap and lather up, and then focus on washing your hands for about 20 seconds, about the time it takes to sing Happy Birthday twice. Focus on washing the front of your hands, the back, in between the fingers, around the nails, and so on. And then rinse everything off. Use something to wipe your hands after that, preferably something disposable like a paper towel, and then use that to turn off the tap as well. If you get a chance, Use that to also open the door to the bathroom as you're leaving. The best way to wash your hands is using running water and soap, but sometimes we don't have that available. So think about carrying with you a hand sanitizer. That should have at least 60% alcohol content.
It's important to realize that those agents don't remove soil and other material that might be on your hands. And in that case, you really need to use soap and water.
If you've been touching objects all around you all day long, just assume that your hands are contaminated and make sure before you prepare food, you wash your hands. Before you eat, that you wash your hands.
You can't emphasize hand hygiene enough. Clean hands save lives.
Keeping your hands clean is a very important activity both at home, at school, at work, and in the healthcare setting.
Hand hygiene or hand washing is the single most important thing that you can do to help prevent the spread of infection and to stay healthy and well.
So we just seen there that hand washing is the single most important thing you could do to help prevent the spread of illness and to stay healthy and well. And we can see the significance of this worldwide, as estimates indicate that washing hands with soap and water can reduce deaths worldwide associated with diarrhea by up to 50%. And as mentioned in the video clip, if everyone routinely washed their hands, 1 million deaths a year could be prevented. To kind of put this into perspective, you think the population of Indianapolis, according to the U.S. Census Bureau in 2012, was just under 835,000 people. So you think about more than the city of Indianapolis being wiped out every year simply because people are not washing their hands or do not have access to proper hand washing technique or methods or materials. And this is significant worldwide as far as infection control, as far as the importance of something as simple as washing your hands. However, we see that hand washing has significant relevance for the day in which we live here in America, in our society, in our busy culture. We see that only 68% of adults wash their hands after using the bathroom. And that's particularly concerning because that means that almost a third of people don't wash their hands after using the bathroom. And this is particularly important because it's been observed that people touch their face very often. In fact, they touch their face approximately 15.7 times an hour, or more than every 4 minutes. So if you think about people not washing their hands after using the bathroom and then touching their face, this very probable that people could get sick from this as they touch their mouth, their nose, the portals of entry into the body where people can get sick. And we see that hand washing is very important as far as reducing the risk of infection or of illness, as the CDC has found that it reduces the risk of respiratory infections by 16%. And this is very important in particularly the elderly and young children. One study documented that RSV, a type of respiratory infection virus that causes a respiratory infection, appears to be spread primarily by hands contaminated with respiratory secretions, such as like from a cough or a sneeze. And this is particularly important for infants and young children, as RSV is the most common cause of bronchiolitis, which is just inflammation of the small airways in the lungs, and pneumonia in children under 1 year of age in the U.S. In fact, almost all children will have an RSV infection by their 2nd birthday. So you can see that this has great significance for children across the U.S. And this is particularly important also because the average sneeze can carry pathogens up to 6 feet, traveling at around 103 miles per hour. And we don't wash our hands after we sneeze or cough or blow our nose. In fact, a study indicates just under 40% of adults indicate that they do not wash their hands after sneezing, coughing, or blowing their nose. So if you would imagine for me for a second that this gentleman here sneezed out into the air up to 6 feet and landed on a bunch of surfaces in your in your desk and you're going about your day, you're touching all these surfaces, and these your hands becoming contaminated with this gentleman's excretions. Okay, and so what's happening is you're touching your face, you're becoming sick. There's a very high probability that you become sick. Imagine this gentleman sneezing into his hands. Think about it. Many people who do sneeze or cough, they just cough or sneeze into the air without covering their mouths. And many people that do cover their mouths do so with their hands. So if you think about this gentleman shaking your hand or touching a doorknob with this his sneeze all over his hands, there's a great potential for him spreading it on to someone else. So sneezing into something like the crook of your arm or into your shirt or into something like a Kleenex or a tissue is of paramount importance to help prevent the spread of infection. Another arena in which we want to look at and be aware of transmission is the bathroom. A study looked at the fecal coliform, or it's this fancy word for fecal bacteria contamination, of various items in the bathroom. Remember that approximately a third of people do not wash their hands after using the bathroom. So what surfaces do you think were contaminated with these fecal bacteria? Possibly the toilet or the floor? Well, it turns out that these fecal bacteria were found to a varying degree on many bathroom surfaces. What is concerning is that several of these items were contaminated that are what I would call post-hand washing items, meaning that even after you wash your hands, you still touch contaminated surfaces, these surfaces that are contaminated by other people's fecal matter. So if you look at the sink here, you look at the faucet, you look at the soap dispenser, you look at the door leading out, and even the door leading in to the bathroom are all contaminated with fecal matter. And this is of great importance when we consider infection control and even just being sanitary and being clean in our daily lives. So we know that people do not wash their hands nearly enough. However, another study looked at female college students and their hand washing behavior, and they found that 63% of female college students wash their hands after using the bathroom, which, I mean, that's pretty close to the other statistic we looked at. But then we look further into this issue, we see that only 38% use soap, and only 32% wash with soap for 5 or more seconds, and only 2% wash their hands with soap for 10 or more seconds. Think about the recommended time. Do you know the recommended time it is recommended to wash your hands? It's 20 seconds. Okay, so not only are we not washing our hands, we're not washing them properly. We're not using soap. We're not spending the appropriate time washing our hands. Think about how much more effective our hands could be at preventing illness instead of spreading them if we take the appropriate time and methods to wash our hands. And remember that bacteria and viruses can live on days on surfaces. And remember or recall that most bathroom surfaces are non-porous. Think about the handle on the way out of the bathroom or the faucet handle on the sink. They're non-porous. Bacteria, viruses could live there for a long time. They can get nice and cozy, take up residence there. So how about touching the faucet handle with your bare hand to turn off the water? Or what about the door handle on the way out of the bathroom? Would you want to touch those or recontaminate your hands? It's very probable. I mean, people do it all the time. And it will happen unless you use some type of technique to avoid recontamination of your hands. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about hand washing method. If hand washing is so important, and if having clean hands is so important, is it not understandable to want to see if there is a best methods, a way to make sure your hands are clean? If we're going to wash our hands, let's do it right. And so let's look at kind of what we've known growing up, we've been taught as children, and growing up what we've practiced. We know to wet our hands with clean running water and apply soap. Rub your hands, lather and scrub them well. Back of hands, between fingers, under the nails. Continue for 20 seconds, and maybe the time it takes to sing Happy Birthday twice. Rinse your hands and to dry your hands, and then you should be good to go. Are we safe now, or are we? Are these not the ways that we were taught to wash our hands growing up? And I think that there's more to this, and hopefully I can convince you of this, and that you can start using these other ideas as you go about your daily lives and as you wash your hands. Okay. So what else should be done? What else should you do when you wash your hands? Well, as I'll soon show you here on the next slide, when people wash their hands, they do not use techniques that ensure that you cover all the surfaces of the hand. There are many hand surfaces that are missed, where bacteria and viruses can still live on your hands because they're not properly washed. Another two topics I've kind of touched on briefly here is that after rinsing your hands, leave the faucet on. Dry your hands with a paper towel and then use the paper towel to turn off the faucet. Okay, you don't want to touch that surface to recontaminate your hands. After you turn off the faucet, keep a hold of your paper towel, as that'll also be your key to getting out of the bathroom without touching the exit door handle. And make sure you discard the paper towel only after you've opened the exit door and you've propped it open with your foot or your behind. Okay, and this is an extremely important concept to understand, and it's important enough that we will provide a live demonstration to illustrate different techniques that you can use to do this. So here was a study that was done, and what they did here is they sampled hands and they looked at areas that were most frequently missed when washing hands, and what they found is that the back of the thumb was most frequently missed, as indicated by the pink or the red, and that the back of the fingernail beds was also an area which was frequently missed, and that in between the fingers, as you can see here, in between the fingers and around the thumb, were also areas that are very frequently missed. And then other areas, as indicated by the light and darker blue, were areas that were missed less frequently, but they were still missed, and then we see the areas that were not missed here. Okay, but there are hand washing techniques that can be used to ensure that you cover all surfaces of the hands, and we will go over those here very shortly. So the World Health Organization has come out with several steps to ensure that hand washing is done properly and that it is done well. Hand surfaces that are not washed properly can still continue to transmit pathogens to others, to objects, or even to yourself. Although there are many steps, the steps for proper hand washing that we'll go over, steps 3 through 8, should only take about 20 seconds. And isn't that worth not getting sick? You think about just 20 extra seconds. You're not only preventing yourself from getting sick, but you're also preventing friends and loved ones from getting sick as well, as you wash your hands and you eliminate the possibility of you transmitting what's on your hands to others. So let's go through the steps real quick. Let's just kind of go over those and discuss them as we go through. So step number 1, we want to wet our hands with water. Okay, that's pretty straightforward enough. Apply enough soap to cover all hand surfaces. So you should see soap suds, and you should see that there's enough soap to adequately cover the hand surfaces. Step number 3 is you want to rub the hands palm to palm, making sure that you cover all the front surfaces of the hands. Next, what you want to do is you want to lace your fingers together with palms facing each other and rub back and forth in a back and forth manner. Next, you want to place the palm, say for instance, your right hand over your left hand, with the palm of your right hand on the back of your left hand, with your fingers laced, and similarly move it backwards and forwards in such a manner as indicated on the picture. Make sure to do this both hands with your right over left and left over right. Next, you want to make sure that you proceed to step 6, and this is another area that is frequently missed, the back of the fingernail beds. This helps eliminate that area as well, making sure that that's properly washed. And what you want to do is you want to form a fist-like formation, grasping each your right hand grasping your left and your right, forming a fist-like formation, and you want to scrub back and forth, making sure that the nail beds are pressing and scrubbing up against of the opposing hand's palm. And we proceed to step number 7, is that you want to have an outstretched thumb. You want to clasp it with the opposing hands and then rotate and twirl it in a rotational pattern, making sure that you cover the entire surface of the thumb, because we know that the back of the thumb is very frequently missed with hand washing. The last and final step for proper hand washing technique is a rotational rubbing of the finger pads on the opposing hand's palm. So make sure that you cover the fingernail beds, as those can be very important sites of bacterial colonization. Bacteria love to live and grow underneath the fingernails. And in fact, it's been very important in the medical system and healthcare world, as what was happening is many diseases were being linked to nurses and bacteria growing underneath their fingernails. And so what they have now is that nurses no longer can wear these longer fingernails, these artificial nails, because bacteria can grow underneath them. So the nail of the beds, the bed of the nails is very important, and underneath the fingernails, very important areas to make sure that you clean when you're washing your hands. And then finally, after the 20 seconds, steps 3 through 8, you want to make sure you rinse hands with water and then dry thoroughly with a towel. And drying is important too. Make sure you're not walking out of the bathroom with wet hands, because what hands will do is it'll make it easier for bacteria and for viruses to transfer onto your hands if you touch an object. Okay, so drying is also an important step of hand washing, and you should take the time to completely dry your hands as well. So steps number 11 and 12, some additional steps here is you want to make sure you open the door with the paper towel and then discard. And then step number 12, okay. So we have a couple other steps here. We have step number 11, in which you want to make sure you turn off the tap with a paper towel. Once you have dried your hands, you want to make sure you keep the paper towel with you. Make sure that you grab the faucet handle with the paper towel. Make sure your hand does not come in contact with that surface to turn off the faucet. Then step number 12, you want to open the door with the paper towel, and then once you have the door propped open with your foot, with your behind, then you want to discard the paper towel, either in the trash can if there's a trash can beside the exit door. If not, be prepared to find a trash can outside of the bathroom, because there may not be one within reach of the exit door. But what about some other solutions that we might come up with? Say if there's no paper towels in the bathroom, what could we possibly do there to avoid contaminating our hands again? The CDC, or actually, I'm sorry, the World Health Organization recommends using your elbow, maybe to turn off the faucet if there's a lever type of configuration on the faucet. But it might be really difficult to do if it's a turn knob. I don't think it'd be very easy to do that with your elbow. Perhaps maybe using a sleeve, or using some type of tissue if you have one on you, to try and turn off the faucet. Similarly with opening the door on the way out, if you don't have a paper towel to do that with, you may have to find some other means, such as using a sleeve, or trying to find some type of tissue to open up the door with. But think about how you're going to get out of the bathroom and plan for that ahead of time, as that'll be important in preventing yourself from having your hands become recontaminated again, not only with your fecal matter, but with other people's too. If they're doing their business and then they're not washing their hands, and they're touching the same thing that you are, and these bacteria can live for up to days and weeks. Think about what was living on your hands at the end of the day. Okay, it's not only good for good proper sanitation and keeping clean, but it could also make people sick. So think about different strategies. Like for instance, say that the door leading out of the bathroom opens outward. You can simply back up your way out of the bathroom. However, it might be more difficult if it's a pull handle. So try to think of different ways that you can do this to make sure you're not recontaminating yourself. Just to kind of cover a brief history of hand washing and how hand washing really all started. And it began back in Vienna in beginning of the 19th century at the Vienna General Hospital. What was happening here is that puerperal fever was killing many birthing mothers. They were coming into the hospital to give birth, and they were dying at an extremely high rate. In fact, the death rate was 5 times higher for mothers delivered in the hospital than for those who delivered at home. Okay, and just kind of explain this hospital a little bit, is that there were 2 maternity wards. there was a maternity ward whose patients were seen by midwives, and there was a maternity ward whose patients were seen by medical students and physicians. However, the mortality rate between the two were vastly different. The mortality rate reached between 20 to 50% in physician wards, and yet the midwife ward maintained a mortality rate of just 1.5%. And although the 1.5% would seem very high today, it's pittance compared to the 20 to 50% in the physician ward. Semmelweis knew that something was going on. He knew that there was some reason that these mothers were dying in the physician ward but not in the midwife ward. Distraught, Semmelweis instituted a revolutionary intervention to reduce the mortality rate. He came up with this idea, he implemented it, and just in a matter of months, the death rate went from, at the time he was measuring, went from 18% to less than 3% in a matter of months. Which is a 6 times reduction in mortality rate, which is the rate in which people would die. Mortality, that's not to mention the morbidity rate, how many people became sick. So you can see that this intervention, that he came up with, is extremely effective. And as we've all probably assumed by now, the intervention was, of course, hand washing. What happened is that Semmelweis ordered physicians and medical students to wash their hands in chlorinated lime solution, which today would be the modern equivalent to bleach. Main ingredient bleach is, for disinfecting is a sodium hypochlorite. Would kill the bacteria and viruses and help to prevent the spread of illness. And Dr. Semmelweis, although he had to enforce his intervention because it was met with stark and fierce criticism from his peers, it would not be enforced by the hospital. So he had to do it himself. He had to go out of his way to make sure that physicians and medical students were washing their hands. And as he came to find out, or as it was discovered, that physicians and medical students were performing autopsies before visiting the maternity ward. So they would come in before they would do the morning rounds and the maternity wards. They would go in and perform autopsies. They would look at these dead people and they would touch them with their hands. They would do the autopsies. As they would touch the dead body, their hands would be contaminated with a deadly streptococcus bacteria. And then they would promptly proceed into the maternity ward, and they would perform their examinations on the mothers getting ready to give birth. And Dr. Semmelweis knew that something was going on with the physicians because the site of infection was always the same on the women, and he knew that it was something with the physician was going on. So he kind of hypothesized there was some type of death particle that was being transmitted from the dead people, from the people in there were autopsies were being performed on, to the people who were just about to give birth. He knew there was something going on there, so he came up with this hand washing intervention. And as we know now, these death particles were simply bacteria, something that they were just starting to discover at the time. So what Semmelweis did was very ingenious, what we would call now as a quasi-experimental, not a true experimental design, but nonetheless it was very effective at proving his point. What he did is he recorded the number of deaths per month. So he recorded the number of deaths that happened per month in the physician ward. It came out to about 30 to 40 deaths per month. Okay. Then what happened is he introduced the experiment. He started enforcing hand washing, and within just a number of months, the mortality rate dropped to about 2 to 3 a month. So he introduced the intervention, the hand washing, then he recorded again to see if there was any change, if there was a drastic reduction. And we can see that when new students were admitted to the hospital, as they were beginning their medical career and they were starting to learn and do rounds in the hospital, they were not accustomed to hand washing because it hadn't been taught to them, and so they weren't washing their hands after doing the autopsy. And so what happened was that you start to see this the death rate come back up, the mortality rate come up to about 12 a month. And Dr. Semmelweis had to get on them about it, and he strictly enforced the hand washing, and the rate dropped again. So it dropped down about 3 a month again after the more strict enforcement. So we see here that this is a what could be called a one-group pre-test post-test design. We see that he had a pre-test. Right here he recorded the number of deaths per month. He introduced his intervention, and then he had a post-test. down here, so you can see that there was some effect. You went from 30 to 40 to 3 after the invention, 2 to 3. So we can see that Dr. Semmelweis was not only very successful in preventing illness in his hospital, but he also proved that disease can be transmitted by hands, and that hand washing is an extremely effective method of preventing illness, and in this case, death. So we talked about a lot about hand washing and its effectiveness, but something that's very common today in our culture is hand sanitizer. And how effective is hand sanitizer? Well, it turns out hand sanitizer is extremely effective, but there are some things that we need to be aware about with hand sanitizer, and I want to cover those briefly before I go into how effective and how beneficial hand sanitizer is. So first off, hand sanitizer is not as effective when hands are visibly dirty or visibly soiled. So if you were to have some blood on your hands, if you were to have some dirt or mud, if you were to have some garbage, some refuse on your hands, you can visibly see, you would want to wash your hands with the recommended steps with soap and water. Okay. Another thing about hand sanitizer is it does not eliminate all types of pathogens. So it actually has very poor activity against bacterial spores, protozoan oocysts, and some non-enveloped or non-lipophilic viruses. Is hand sanitizer effective at killing many types of pathogens, bacteria and viruses? Yes. However, there are some exceptions, and these are some of them I wanted to make you aware of. And another one is that the hand sanitizer, the FDA recommends 60 to 95% ethanol or alcohol concentration for proper disinfectant purposes. Some products I read about were being marketed at about 40% ethanol concentration, and they were not effective really at all at preventing illness or even killing the bacteria and viruses on the hands. So you want to make sure it's around 60 to 95% alcohol concentration with the hand sanitizer that you purchase. Another thing is that adding a disinfectant such as chlorhexidine, triclosan, or a quaternary ammonium compound will provide residual antimicrobial activity. And what this simply means is that you add these other chemicals to them, such as chlorhexidine, triclosan, and it'll provide additional benefit to you because they'll coat your hands and they'll provide antimicrobial activity long after the alcohol has done its job. So the way hand sanitizer works is that you put it on, you rub it on your hands, it evaporates, it kills everything on your hands, or the vast majority of everything on your hands, and then it's done its job, leaving your hands free to touch other things and become infected again. However, hand sanitizer with these compounds will provide lasting benefits to you as it'll continue to kill and disinfect your hands. So we see here, this is a instant hand sanitizer spray drug facts. We can see here that the alpha alcohol content underneath the active ingredients up here is within our target range of 60 to 95% of alcohol. So we can see that this would be appropriate for use of sanitizing your hands and preventing illness. So here we can see that the use of alcohol gel hand sanitizer is, as I'll cover here shortly, is extremely effective at killing germs on the hands. But not only is it effective at killing germs on the hands, it's also extremely effective at reducing illness and sickness. The use of alcohol gel hand sanitizer, as seen in the first bullet, in an elementary school reduced absenteeism, which is people not showing up to school because they're sick, due to infection by nearly 20%. This was done among 16 elementary schools and 6,000 students. Okay, and similarly, the use of alcohol gel hand sanitizer at a university showed a 40% reduction in missed school or work days and reduced upper respiratory illness symptoms from close to 15% to 40%. Think about 40% reduction in missed school or work days. Think about how much more productive a university could be, how much productive a student or an employee could be, or an athlete if they were sick if they decreased their chance of getting sick by 40%, or reduced their upper respiratory illness symptoms from 15% to 40%. not only would you be able to go to work, be able to go to class, be able to concentrate better. If you're not sniffling, you don't have a cough, you're not sneezing, you're likely to be much more productive and to achieve much more than you would if than if you were sick. So hand sanitizer, put briefly, is very effective at preventing illness. We look at hand sanitizer effectiveness, and we can see why it's so effective at preventing illness. We can see here from on the left side of this table here, we can see adenovirus type 2, parainfluenza virus, rhinovirus, which causes about 30 to 50% of all colds. We see influenza virus here, causes many people every year to become sick and even possibly even die. And parainfluenza virus, which affects many children every year. We look at the left-hand columns, we see all these viruses, and we look at the right-hand column over on this far side, and we see the number of bacteria, the percentage of bacteria rather, that are killed within 30 seconds. And we see here that parainfluenza virus, that his hand sanitizer will kill 99.993% of parainfluenza virus type 3 in just 30 seconds. We look at rhinovirus, 99.9, Coxsackie virus, 99.9, Hep A, 94.4, influenza virus type A2, 99.999. So we can see here that hand sanitizer is extremely effective at killing viruses, and is an extremely effective way to clean your hands. So there are a number of other things that are really beneficial, very good about hand sanitizer. Besides the sheer killing power of alcohol-based hand sanitizers, they have a wide antimicrobial spectrum, which means they allow for the disinfection of many types of pathogens, whether or not it's a virus, whether or not it's a bacteria. That will kill many different types of them. So it covers a wide variety, so you're making sure that you cover your bases. Although we do have those exceptions, which is why we should still wash our hands occasionally, but for many instances, hand sanitizer should do the job. However, hand washing should always be considered the front line of defense. Hand sanitizer also acts very rapidly. Pathogens die very quickly after application of the solution, as we've seen in the previous slide. I mean, they would die within 30 seconds, and some could even die much quicker than that. Another thing is that hand sanitizer spreads without significant friction on the hands. And what this does is it eliminates the friction, which can damage skin. What happens if you have damaged skin is you have rough surfaces on your hands, and can form flaps and different things and crevices in the skin where bacteria can get in and colonize your skin until it becomes a part of the normal bacteria on your skin, and then you can later pass it on to other people. Another good thing about it is that it evaporates very quickly, and there's no need for a sink or a drying method for the use of hand sanitizer. You don't need to go find a sink. You don't need to have running water. You don't need to have a paper towel or a blow dryer to dry your hands off with. All you need is a pair of hands and some hand sanitizer, and you're good to go. You apply it, it evaporates very quickly, and you're free to go about your business. You're free to go about your workday, walking to class, whatever you're doing. It flows very easily with our culture and our busy lifestyle. It saves time, something that's very important in today's society. Then when hands are not visibly contaminated, it's been observed that alcohol-based hand rubs have been shown to be more effective than hand washing with antiseptic soap. Okay, so this is in certain instances. It's not. I'm sure it's not across the broad spectrum of things. But when you think about when your hands are visibly contaminated, you still want to make sure you wash your hands and not use alcohol-based hand rubs, as it's not effective at removing all the things that are visibly contaminating your hands. So if we know that there are hand techniques for washing our hands, there are techniques for washing our hands properly, making sure we cover all surfaces. there should be hand techniques for using alcohol hand sanitizer because we want to make sure we cover all surfaces of our hands with the alcohol-based rub. And as it turns out that it's very simple, straightforward enough that the techniques are the same for both hand washing and applying hand sanitizer. However, the spreading of the hand sanitizer, or steps 3 through 8, can be done while walking or talking or reading, or doing many other tasks that do not involve the hands. So it's very important, and we can run through those very quickly here. Again, as we can see in step 3, you rub your palms together, palm to palm. Steps 4 and 5, you want to lace your fingers with your palms facing each other, and then with one hand over top of the other, and vice versa, making sure you cover in between your fingers. And then step 6, you want to make sure you cover the back of your fingernails by clasping your hands together in a fist-like fashion and rubbing the finger beds up against the opposing hand's palm. You want to clasp your thumb with one hand and rotate, making sure to cover all the surfaces of your thumb. And then lastly, you want to take your finger pads and you want to scrub them in a circular fashion on the opposing hand's palm, making sure to scrub the bed of the nails, as that's an important site for hand washing as well, for hand sanitization. So then we must ask ourselves, which is better? Is hand washing or hand sanitizer better? And I think that this graph here really shows the difference between the two. If we look here at this left-hand column, the product configuration, we see number 1, as indicated down the legend here, is a non-antimicrobial lotion soap. Okay, so number 2 is an antimicrobial lotion soap, and then number 3 is alcohol gel sanitizer. And then 4 and 5 are combinations of the alcohol gel hand sanitizer and the first 2, the lotion soaps. So we can see here with a non-antimicrobial lotion soap, the soap without the antimicrobial properties, they did a series of washes and they found a 99.49% reduction, percent mean log reduction from baseline, or percent reduction from the number of bacteria on the hand. Okay, and the bacteria that they were using here, it was S. marcans, which is an opportunistic bacteria that is fairly resistant to various types of interventions, and it's important opportunistic bacteria in the healthcare arena. So we see that we have 99.49% reduction in the number, or percent reduction of the number of bacteria from hand washing with an antimicrobial soap or the non-antimicrobial soap, 99.19% with wash 3, wash 7. So we see it's eliminating 99% of the bacteria on these hands. We can see here with the antimicrobial lotion soap, we see a little bit better performance with 49 to 68%, from 0.19 to 0.81. 0.09 to 0.88. So we're seeing an improvement. I don't know if we could call it huge or significant, but it is a fairly significant improvement. We can see that here. When we look at as compared to the alcohol gel hand sanitizer, we see that it's covering 99.99, which is actually even a further improvement here, from 81 to 98, from 88 to 89, and then we actually see this goes down a little bit here. But overall, the alcohol gel hand sanitizer is extremely effective at killing this bacteria. So here we see that the combination of the two, they don't necessarily perform any better. In fact, that they don't perform any better than the others. And although none of these were statistically better than the other, none of these methods, these 5 methods, were statistically better than the other, there was a specific statistical procedure called rank ordering procedure, in which they showed that antimicrobial soap proved to be consistently more effective than the non-antimicrobial soap, and the alcohol gel sanitizer proved to be consistently more effective than the other methods. So overall, what they found to be consistently more effective was number 3 here, or the alcohol gel sanitizer. However, as you can see from these figures here, is that they're all extremely effective and can be used for cleaning hands. So if hand washing is so important, we know to wash our hands in the bathroom. But are there other periods, are there other critical times when we should wash our hands? And the answer is yes. And you think about before, during, and after preparing food, especially if you're preparing food for like a cookout, if there's many people there, and your hands are contaminated, and you're touching food with your bare hands. You're contaminating food that everybody else will be eating and ingesting, and potentially contaminating them. So you want to be sure to wash your hands there, or before, even before you yourself eat food. Make sure that you're not contaminating the sandwich you're eating, or whatever, the apple that you're eating. And then before and after caring for someone who is sick, not just protect yourself, because sick people, if they're infected with a virus or bacteria, they can transmit that to you, but also because you may have things living on your hands that may not bother you, but because the patient or the individual who is sick may be very susceptible to something that may not harm you, but would cause them a significant infection or an illness. Because they're already busy enough trying to fight off one infection, and they have a reduced ability to try and fight off two. And so one bacteria might be able to cause a significant and further infection in them. Another one is after using the toilet. We covered that one. And then similarly, after changing diapers or cleaning up a child who has used the toilet, such as in a daycare center, or if with a mother with a young child. It's another important time to do that. To wash your hands. And then, as we covered before, after blowing your nose, after coughing, or after sneezing, we're expelling so many viruses or so many bacteria onto these surfaces, or potentially into our hands, that we make sure we wash our hands. And then after touching an animal or animal waste, as animals can transmit various type of pathogens very easily onto people's hands, and then as we touch or pet them, and then we touch our face, it can transmit illness. And then similarly after handling pet food and pet treats, and after touching garbage. And I mean, if you're in a congested area, such as like an academic center, a workplace, or a hospital, and you are touching objects that others have touched, assume your hands are dirty. Don't assume that they're clean. Always assume that your hands are dirty if you're touching many objects in a busy, crowded place. And if you're touching something that is probably contaminated, such as dirty dishes or garbage, or maybe you're at the petting zoo and you're petting a sheep or something, assume that your hands are contaminated and wash them before you eat, or just wash them in general, because we touch things constantly. Our hands are our way of interacting with the world around us. And the cleaner our hands are, the less likely we are to transmit these pathogens to other people, and to transmit infection as well. So we can look here briefly at some of the preventable diseases that could be obviously prevented if we would simply wash our hands. If everybody were to use hand sanitizer, if everybody were to wash their hands after using the bathroom, or just wash and be more clean in general as they practice hand hygiene and avoid infected or contaminated objects. We look at para-influenza virus, or HPIV, which is it's second only to respiratory syncytial virus in causing lower respiratory tract infections. We look at rhinovirus, which is the most common cause of acute respiratory infections in humans. We see rhinoviruses cause estimated 30 to 50% of all colds. And then last we look at influenza virus, and in the United States alone, or on average, 5 to 20% of the population gets the flu, and more than 200,000 people are hospitalized from seasonal flu-related complications. Kind of put that in perspective again, that's between 16 to 65 million people every year that are becoming sick with the flu. And from 1976 to 2006, we also see mortality from the flu, not just morbidity, but mortality, as the flu has killed between 3,000 to 49,000 people in the U.S. Within that time period. So we can see that hand washing is significantly important for preventing diseases and for making sure that we keep not only ourselves healthy, but those around us, such as a grandparent or maybe a niece or a nephew or a child who are even more susceptible to illness, and you could get sick very easily from these bacteria that we have on our hands. So just kind of give a brief review here. We see that many people do not wash after using the bathroom. We know that when people do wash, they often do it improperly. They do not use soap. They do not cover the surfaces of the hand properly. They do not use proper hand technique. And then they touch their doorknob or the door handle on the way out of the bathroom, and they touch the faucet handle after they finish washing their hands, and they recontaminate their hands. We also see that hand washing and hand sanitizer are extremely effective at cleaning hands. And not only are they effective at cleaning hands, and because of that, they're very effective at preventing illness as well. And as the CDC said, that clean hands save lives and they prevent illness. They said that hand washing is the single most important thing you can do to stay healthy and prevent the spread of illness. So hope this was of use to you. Here are some sources that I've used for my presentations. I hope this was a benefit to you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.